the H2O man himself.
What's going on, Ron?
Ron Waterman.
Not much, brother. Just glad to be here.
Yeah. I actually first, so I was at Team Impact similar, probably around the time that I'm sure we would have crossed paths at some point, but the time that I remember meeting you was at a UFC fight. And it was very fast. And I don't think you were fighting that night, but Shane was the guy you were training.
Okay. The Texas Showdown.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yep.
It was that one.
And there was an accident that happened at that fight where a man lost a bit of himself that no one ever once crushed and lost. Mm-hmm. And I remember that there was a long delay in the fights before that, and we were trying to figure it out, and somebody came up and they were like, this is going to take a while.
I was debating on becoming a UFC fighter, and that was the night that I decided it wasn't for me.
Oh, really? Wow. I never knew that about you before.
That's a complete lie.
Yeah. So, Ron, talk us through your career path, because I don't know, and this is an unfair stereotype that a lot of athletes get. I know you were a collegiate athlete, and obviously you were a professional athlete. But one of the stereotypes that a lot of athletes get is that they are sort of these like grunts. So how do you go from athlete, because you were an amateur and professional athlete, you were also an art teacher and an author. How did that career path work? How did you get from point A to point B?
Well, I was a college wrestler, so that was kind of an easy transition to UFC fighter from there, because I was as a coach, my wrestling team, obviously they're like, hey, we've got a challenge for you. There's this cool sport that was just coming into the mainstream at the time. And it was just kind of one of those sports that was kind of taboo on television. And they dared me to enter this local competition that was down in Denver, about an hour drive away, coming up, and they said, we dare you to enter this competition. And there was 3 fights in one night. So I took them up on the challenge. I trained for like literally a month, drove down to Denver and had 3 fights in one night. I ended up fighting 2 of the guys that were previously in the UFC, and won 3 fights in one night. Each of them lasted like 30 seconds. And come to find out, it was called the Boss Root Invitational.
Oh, nice.
And to find out, John Peretti is the official of this, and he's the UFC matchmaker. So lo and behold, I get a invitation right to the next UFC. So I had 3 amateur fights, and I get invited right to the next UFC.
Wow.
My career just kind of springboards right into the UFC. My first UFC fight lasted 20 seconds. I tapped the guy out by strikes. So my MMA career it just explodes, gets launched right up. And then I find myself getting flown out to California to get put in the first UFC video game. And on the way out to...
Which I own, by the way.
What console was that on?
It was on PlayStation.
Oh, the original one.
Yeah, it's on the original PlayStation. I don't have the PlayStation, but I still have the UFC fight game. Yeah, so that I could play as Ron.
What were your stats? I'm sure you don't know that one. I wouldn't.
I thought it was tech at the time. It's so cool because I'm thinking, oh man, this is so high tech. And then I played it like probably 6 months ago, and oh my gosh, compared to today, it's like
it's so hard to play.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah, I recently started playing the Nintendo 64 again, GoldenEye, Rogue Squadron, some of those old ones, and I was like, this sucks. This is not what I remembered. But I did want to ask you. You mentioned that it was a taboo sport. I remember. I mean, I don't know that I was aware of it when it really first came out, but when at least I became aware of it, there was, growing up in church, there was a lot of, I would say it was taboo. I think you nailed it on the head with that. Why do you think it was so taboo? Being a sport that's controlled, similar to boxing?
Well, back then, I mean, they were calling it, human cockfighting, and McCain was, trying to get it outlawed from television. And, it was just one of those things that people didn't understand. They didn't consider it a real sport, and it was just a bloodbath. And I knew right away, clear back then, I knew that this sport was going to explode one day.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And sure enough, now, because I saw the competitive edge of it, and And, sure enough, now it's sanctioned and it's, it's become one of the biggest sports in mainstream, of course. But anyway, to continue my story, I was on the airplane flying out to get this videotape taken, and I sit next to this guy, and he starts asking me all these questions, and lo and behold, he's best friends with Shane McMahon, and he starts talking to me and telling me how I should be this professional wrestler, and he sets me up with an interview with Shane McMahon, so I get flown out to WWE headquarters the following week in Stamford, Connecticut, with Shane McMahon, Jim Ross, and all these big wigs of WWE. And I end up signing a 4-year contract with the WWE and giving up fighting for a couple of years and traveling the world with the World Wrestling Federation at the time.
Good grief.
World Wrestling Entertainment. Become tag team partners with Brock Lesnar, and I'm traveling the world with Bautisa and Cena and all these guys that you watch on television today. And so that was another chapter of my life that I got to experience for a couple of years. And when that chapter closed, that's when I kind of got tied up with Team Impact, because one of the guys that I used to wrestle with was a former Power Team member, Rico Constantino.
Okay.
And said, "You don't want to go with the Power Team." He goes, "You got to travel with these guys called Team Impact." So he gave me the number of Jeff Otis. I send Jeff Otis an email, and he calls me on the phone 30 minutes later, and flies me out to California, or flies me out to Texas, and puts me on a crusade with Jeff Neal and Guy Earl and a couple of others, and I've been with the team ever since.
That's awesome. Jeff Neal, the Man of Steel.
Yeah, I remember when we were in the office, the version of the story that we got was that Jeff Otis discovered you. And then when somebody was like, "No, Ron emailed Jeff," and Jeff was like, "Well, yeah, but I called him back." We're like, "High five!" High five! High five! You got cold emailed by one of the greatest athletes in the world at the time, and so well done on calling him back. It was a way to scope the talent.
Good call, buddy.
Yeah. So what was it like being on the road with those guys in the WWF, which is now, like you said, it's the WWE. What was that road lifestyle like? And especially, you were a believer at the time that you were on the road with them, or not?
Lucas, I was a brand new believer.
Yeah. So what was that like?
And I thought I was going to go in there and just change the world.
Right.
Being this brand new believer, I thought I was going to go in there and start holding Bible studies with these guys and just totally change all of this. And man, I was so awakened, just kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing, and it was rough. It was actually really hard, trying to survive in that world and trying to excel and move up, and being surrounded by, I guess not a better word for it, just being surrounded by demons.
Yeah.
and that environment, and trying to survive in there and trying to excel and still battle everything that's around you. And I lasted for 2 years, and I said, I can't do this anymore. And had to get out.
You talk a lot in your book about how your first few weeks on the road with Team Impact were really life-changing in the fact of the perspective that it brought on what true manhood was and how to take care of your family and those kind of things. One of the things that we've really noticed as we've done this podcast is that there is this huge gap in male community, and I think a lot of guys are in that same boat that you were in when you were with the WWE and WWF, as far as that they want to be able to do things as a believer, but it's so hard when the world is pressing against you. What would you say to guys that are in that boat to encourage them, what are things that they can do to begin the pursuit of godly manhood, of being a godly husband, a godly father, and just for the single guys like what I was just a few months ago, to be a godly man in the midst of a world that's constantly like putting things against you or pressing on you to make changes that are in the opposite direction?
Yeah, just having that accountability and being surrounded by other Christian, strong Christian role models was huge for me. So when I got with Team Impact, instead of being surrounded by all these worldly guys that are all about egos and themselves and what I called God glory and girls, now I'm surrounded by these guys that are all about Jesus and living for Christ, and they're all about their families, and they're praying over me, and they're praying over their families, and that God comes first in their lives. And man, I was just floored to room with these guys that are on the phone. They're praying for their wives over their phone every single night, and they don't room by themselves. They room with another guy, just hold each other accountable. And it was just a different world for me. And to enter into this other world, I was like, man, this is amazing. And I was so unlike what I was used to, that I was like, this is what I was called to do.
And as a part of Team Impact, Danley and I got to go several years on the road with them over the course of time, and getting to see your ministry and your interaction with people. The one thing that I always remember was that there were a handful of the athletes, not that all the guys on Team Impact weren't incredible athletes in their own regard, but that there were a handful of athletes that allowed the feet ministry to maintain legitimacy. Randall was one, because Randall was constantly competing as a power lifter, and so that there were guys that were in competition that were part of it. Josh Thigpen was another, as he did the World Strongman competitions. And you were one, and your area of athletics, being in fighting, was always one that for a lot of people there was a big question mark, that they were like, okay, so he's a fighter, and he's a Christian, and he's a minister. How do those things, mesh together? Yeah. How does that work? So what was it, for you? Was there ever any difficulty reconciling those things together, or did you always feel like it was a pretty clear thing that was offered to you, or opportunities you had in front of you?
I thought it was always super clear for me. And I've said this from day one, is God needs people in every single one of those fields. He needs witnesses in every one of those. And God used me in that field all the time. I mean, as a witness. So when I was on the road, as a fighter, I mean, I got to witness to people all around me. After I got through with a fight in Pride, I got to stand in front of millions of people and quote scripture in the middle of the ring. And I got to point my finger up to the sky and thank the Lord for the opportunity that he gave me, and not point my finger at myself like you see so many athletes do today. And, I got to be a witness for him in front of millions of people. And, that's what God's using me for. It wasn't about me. It was about him. So, and be a good sportsman, go out there and hug your opponent, and, give thanks to the Lord for the opportunities that he's given you. So, God needs witnesses in every single sport. It doesn't matter what it is. And it wasn't about the violence of the sport. It was about the competition of the sport. And I'm a competitor, and I still am today. And I love the competition aspect of the sport. It's not about me going out and hurting my opponent. It's never been about that for me. It's competition, and I love competition. I still do, and I always will. But